Welcome to the great conversation where ideas matter. Ideas shape markets. Ideas can change the world. Many of you know that in my younger days, I traveled the world. Wanted to be the next Ernest Hemingway. Yeah, just like I wanted to be a great baseball star. Both of those didn't happen, but the experiences were invaluable to my later life, both personally and professionally. Traveling through Afghanistan and India and Pakistan, parts of the world that changed forever. And so I'm always just totally fascinated with people who have had similar journeys as me. Ran into a gentleman who at 15 became a boy soldier, and his special story of going through many different versions of the military, if you will, and the experiences he had also fed a very interesting DNA, and that DNA is around resilience in character, leadership in action, the history and how our past is a prologue to our future. He is a man who's sensitive around human rights, and he's been a fairly prolific author, unlike me. Who's actually published a number of books, and the most recent one will be the subject of today's great conversation when we get around to it. I want you all to meet Robin Horsfall. Robin, it's great having you coming in from Wales in the United Kingdom.
No, it's great to be here, Ron. We're a long way apart, about 7,000 miles, I think. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, Robin and I both firmly believe that the internet is dictated by mileage, and that's why we have these hiccups all the time. But of course, we both are later generation. Most of the newer generation wouldn't describe it that way.
No. I was born in 1957, the beginning of the space age, the year that Sputnik went round the Earth for the first time.
That's right. That's right. I was 2 years before that, 1955. I think Disneyland started back then.
Yep.
And we both been through some amazing changes in our society because of the tools we've created, and also the kind of events that have colored our lives, like the moonshot, for example, and the whole idea of the internet. Robin, let's do a little background, though, because I'm going to ask you a question that I actually don't know. I just implied in the opening here, and that is you went through some tremendous experiences in the military, in the British Special Forces. I'd love to hear how you think that's coloring how you see the world today.
Well, I had a very difficult childhood, shall we say. My mother was single, my father was in prison, and so I didn't have a father until I was 7. My mother married a man who adopted me and gave me his name, Jeffrey Horsfall. And after 7 years, their marriage fell to pieces. And so at the age of 14, I was at a grammar school, which is a high-level school in the UK. And but I was failing, and I was failing very much because of my home situation. And I didn't like the idea of failing, but I resented also all forms of authority. But I walked into a military recruitment office and tried to join the army at 14. And the school leaving age in 1972 was 15. So they said, look, you're too young, but you can fill in this paperwork, come back, do some tests, come back next year, and you can join the British Army. So at the age of 15 and a half, I was a full-time member of the British Army in what was called junior service. So you did two years and 3 months, and then you joined your adult unit at the age of 17 and a half to 18. And those years were so important. They were so formative. They built the strong foundations for the future. I think without them, I was on the slippery slope to disaster. So it was in some ways a form of non-graduate military college, and most of my colleagues, most of my friends from that time actually benefited greatly from that experience. So it took young men with no qualifications at all, but potential, and gave them opportunity. And the world is full of young men today who have that same potential, but don't have that same opportunity. And it's a wasted resource because there are so many organizations and corporations and governments that say, unless you've been through this academic process and proved that you can write essays and get these qualifications on paper, then you're doomed to be a second-class citizen for the rest of your life. So I had that opportunity. At 18, I was a paratrooper. At 21, I was a special forces soldier. At 27, I was an international bodyguard and a mercenary. And I ended up as a major in the FARC forces of Frelimo in Mozambique for 15 months of a war there. I did lots and lots of different operations. One, the famous one in London in 1980, when we rescued 19 hostages from the Iranian embassy. I did 5 tours of Northern Ireland as a soldier on the streets, and 2 as a special forces soldier. And I took part in the Falklands War. So, and that was just the beginning. So, you know, I did all that by the time I was 32, and I'm 66 now. So my military foundations were 12 years in the British Army. And, but they were the solid structures that everything else grew from, without a doubt.
Well, it's so funny because when I saw the title of one of your books, which is your autobiography called Fighting Scared, I did want to ask you about that because it just it piqued my interest from the standpoint of here's a warrior who started at 15 and he writes an autobiography choosing that title. Tell me about that.
The title, I was my editor, my main editor before the company, before Wendell Nicholson got it, was my wife. And I started to write the book, and I got the first few chapters out of the way, and she read them. And she said, this is, I won't use the word, but she said it wasn't good. And she said, where's the color? Where's the emotion? Where's the life? What you've done is written a military report here, and it's just facts. What happened next? And so she inspired me to start to put the book together and start to have, you know, what was your mother doing the day you left? Was the sun shining through the window? How did you feel when you hugged her before you left home? All those parts. So it became quite a cathartic experience, revealing those emotions. And she's always been absolutely wonderful at doing that. And the book shaped from there. But then we had to find a title. And she said, well, you know, what's the book really about? I said, well, there's a lot of fighting in it. And she said, yeah. And she said, but why were you fighting so much? And I said, well, when I was 19, 2 drunks came into the room one night and almost beat me to death. They got me in my bed and they battered me for over 20 minutes, broke my jaw, dislocated my jaw, broke my ribs, my fingers, attacked me with a razor, and nearly killed me. And after that, I became quite unstable and violent. Fortunately, I was in a violent world, which could cope with that. And I was always fighting after that. And it was because I was so scared of getting hurt like that again. So we came up with the title Fighting Scared, or she did very much more than me. And it fits very well with the book. And so it's not just a gas and bash 'em and smash 'em book. It's a personal development story about this young 15-year-old boy who wants to find a place in the world. And I actually tried to join the Royal Army Medical Corps and ended up in the Parachute Regiment, which is strange. And how that story moves forward. And she was a very, very formative part of it, because at 21, I was that lone wolf, that man who was a dedicated soldier. My mother had died of cancer by then at the age of 37. So the army was my home. And I was the guy that stayed in barracks when guys went home at Christmas, because I didn't have a home to go to, until I met her when I was on Special Air Service selection when I was 21 years old. And we've been together 45 years now, and we're great grandparents 6 times. So we're quite prolific as well.
Well, you know, first of all, congratulations on your marriage, and more importantly, congratulations on a life partner who informs and infuses your creativity in your life. This context, though, Robin, I want everyone to hear this context, because in it, in your profile, we have learned how it gave you a lesson in psychological resilience for yourself and others around leadership. And you bring all those tools to bear in the context of today's times. And this world is in a volatile, uncertain, challenging world right now. And you wrote a book recently, and the book is actually a compendium of what I call reporting from the field on Ukraine. You call it Slava Ukraini, or Glory to Ukraine. And the context of that, of all your background feeding into this to try to give us a feeling, an emotive feeling, like your wife said, an emotive feeling of what's really going on here, and its contextual relationship with all the other events in the world. Tell us about Slava Ukraini.
Yeah, the full title is Slava Ukraini, Who Dares Shares, because Who Dares Shares is my cutoff line at the end of most of my blogs. And it's taken from Who Dares Wins, which is the motto of the Special Air Service. So Who Dares Shares works really, really well in social media. I started writing because and putting up warnings in early 2022, because it was clear to me that with 100,000 Russian troops massing on the Belarus border, that they had every intention of crossing it and invading. And the British press were talking about Boris Johnson's Christmas party. The Australians were talking about sending Djokovic back because he breached the COVID rules. And America was talking about their favorite president, number 45. And consequently, this was just seemed to me to be getting ignored. So I started throwing up warnings about it on social media, and I had very, very small audience of a few thousand. And then, of course, not about maybe a week or two afterwards, over they came with their invasion and their assault towards Kyiv. And so then I was even more frustrated and more angry. So I started banging the table on social media, and very quickly got this huge following of readers on LinkedIn, where sometimes I had 1.5 million people reading my posts every week. And then people started to say to me, look, if you put this together, you've got an observational diary here. And so I said, well, let's see where the war goes. If there's a conclusion, then we can, I could think about that. But that prompting gave me the motivation to carry on. So I started to bring the stuff together, and I don't have a sense that the war is going to come to an end soon, unless something unexpected happens. And as a result, I thought after 18 months, it's time to put this together and publish it. So only 2 weeks ago, was it a week ago, on the 6th, I published it on Amazon, and I published it on my webpage as well. And it's had a very, very successful start. It's 100,000 words. It's emotive. It's opinionated. But I don't dance around the lie. And I accuse governments and I accuse national media resources of dancing around the lie. Everybody knows what the truth is, but nobody knows. They're frightened of getting cancelled, shut down, closed by people. Yeah. So I realized that people were dancing around the lie. So everybody knows what the truth is, but because they're frightened of being cancelled, closed down by their editors, not having their writing produced or put out in the public domain, or not being allowed to be on television, then they get cancelled. So they dance around the line. They pretend they don't know who blew up the pipeline. They pretend they don't know who's responsible for something because they might get sued. So although I have to couch my language very, very carefully, not to fall into the same traps, I refuse to dance around the line. I'll boldly stand up and say, I think Vladimir Putin did this. I think we didn't do this because. And I've maintained that over the last 18 months with a very positive and biased view that, you know, Ukraine are in the right. They're the good guys. And in spite of the fact that, like every nation, they've got problems that they have to deal with, their country was invaded by an aggressor without provocation, and they have every right to defend themselves, and we should support them because they're not only fighting for Ukraine, they're fighting for Western democracy and the ideologies that we value and live by. So glory to Ukraine.
Ideology is a powerful thing. Ideology can be described as political. Ideology can be described as theological. Ideology is a powerful, powerful emotion, and with it comes the possibility for irrational conduct. Ego comes into play, hubris comes into play. Mm-hmm. And when you say dancing around the lie, or lies, we should say, lies, mm-hmm. Again, as a student of history, one of the first things that I was attuned into is and it's playing out also in this recent Israeli-Hamas conflict, is back in World War II, where the world attempted to first ignore the threat of Hitler's Germany, which was evoking the emotions and resentment of the German nation after their fall in World War I and the depredation of their economy and their way of life. And that led to the election of a strongman who could take back their dignity, take back their way of life. And oddly enough, I saw a lot of that building up to the Ukraine conflict. Am I making sense to you? Does that appear to have similarities to the post-World War II syndrome?
I think so. I think I just recently started reading The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray. Mm. I do like to listen to Jordan B. Peterson as well, who are extraordinarily intelligent and well thought out people. And I recommend anybody to listen to them. But this behavior of people when they're controlled by fear, you get masses in the population who are controlled by people working on their base instincts. You know, they're going to come to our country. They're going to steal our jobs. They're stealing our culture. They're taking away our women. You know, whatever it is, they get you to be frightened of something. One of the propaganda systems invented by Joseph Goebbels. And it works. It works really, really well. And we can see it working in our politics all the time now. So you don't have to get the academic, intelligent, reasonable, thought out people who are good at debate and argument and introspection voting for you. All you've got to do is get the people with a short attention span who are far too busy to go further than the headline and tell them that you're going to save the world and you're their only hope, and they're all going to come across the border and kill you if you don't do something about it and vote for them now. And that's unfortunately seems to be the modern trend in democracies. And that's a bigger danger than the Russians, a bigger danger than the Chinese. And we're all experiencing it in Western democracies at the moment. We don't have enough people in our society anymore, especially in government, who are prepared to take the time to sit down and think about what they're saying and what they're believing and check it out and get clever people in the government, rather people than just, you know, sometimes people who aren't that well qualified, who just want to be professional politicians and have just been elected and have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this impulse of human nature. We like to call it pragmatism at times, or practical, or utilitarian. But this idea of let's just take care of business, and not thinking of the long game, and not paying attention to the past, the history, which is prologue to the future. So I love that. I love that statement, Robin. Fear. I always said fear is the original sin of mankind. That is, all the things you said. Fear leads to all this behavior that ends up being very destructive in one's personal life, professional life, and of course the world. And yet, dancing around the lie in Ukraine right now. Ukraine was not a perfect country, just like the United States has been on this quest for hundreds of years, called democracy. I mean, the idea of a representative democracy was an experiment back in the day. And many philosophers came over from Europe to observe the experiment, thinking it had to fail because it depended on the common man, not a king, not a queen, not an autocrat, but the representation of the common man in their government and in their way of life. But as John Adams said, it would require some checks and balances, and it would require an educated citizenry, or it would fall apart. And it was so interesting, because I was vacationing a number of years back, and an Australian was in the pool with his family, an elder guy like me, and he comes up to me and goes, "You're American?" I go, "Yes, I am." He goes, "Let me ask you something. What do you think is the greatest threat to the world right now?" Right out of the blue. And I kind of smiled, and I go, "It's got to be a trick question. You must have something in mind, but I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I think the greatest threat for me, as an American looking at the world, is none of the governments, none of the people in the world now believe that a great conversation," using my tagline here, "that a great conversation, otherwise known as representative democracy, works. It's too slow. It doesn't take advantage of technology because of our privacy and compliance and regulatory conditions around technology acceptance. It is too slow. And Putin's moving fast. China's moving fast. The autocrats of the world are going to win, because at the end of the day, they can make things happen." And so we start getting attracted to strong men and women who can ignore the checks and balances of our representative democracy and just do whatever the hell they want and get it done. And the Australian looked at me, he goes, "I think you got something there." What do you think, Robin, as you look at the world?
I think history proves that not to be the case. Once the democracies have come together and agreed that they're fighting a great evil, it takes a while for that steamroller, that big engine, to get turned over. But once it does turn over, it has the money, it has the focus, it has the population, and you also have the population behind what you're fighting for, the belief. And people will sacrifice their lives for the greater good. And that's one of the most amazing things about human beings, when they believe wholeheartedly in what they're fighting for. They will lay down their lives for that belief. And that's quite incredible. I don't think you find people laying down their lives for an autocracy. They'll lay down their lives for freedom, for the rule of law, for a law-based society, for their wives and children to live in relative safety in comparison and outside of slavery. And they'll do that. And that's one of the most valuable parts of our system. I mean, the American Constitution was written by the most amazingly clever and educated group of Englishmen. But it's true. And they were also Freemasons. And they had a great deal of integrity. And what they came up with was so far ahead of its time. And it's incredible. And one of the things that saved America in the last 3 years from autocracy, from dictatorship, is that constitution and the fact that your military take an oath to uphold the constitution, not the government, not the leadership, but the constitution. And that's a great strength, and it's to be admired. And that's why America keeps rolling forwards in spite of all the problems that it comes across. I think it was Churchill that said something along the lines, and I paraphrase, America can be relied on to get it right after, what is it, after going through all the other alternatives.
You know, and Tocqueville, a Frenchman in the 1800s who came over to review the experiment, said many of the same things. So what I love about what you just did is I tried to highlight people's question mark. Does it still work? And then you brought up past his prologue, a boy soldier in the fight, looking back and saying, you know, we may have those fears. We may have those sentiments. We even may make the mistake, if you will, of electing people who don't remember the Constitution and what it and the formation of this republic. But once the pressure is on, once the world balance has been shaken, whether it's 9/11, Nazi Germany, or in this case, the genocidal views of a Russian president, history says we'll come together around that idea and we'll get it right and we'll collaborate and defeat the enemy. And I thank you so much for that reminder, Robin.
Nothing combines people like a common foe. When we had the Cold War, we had the Soviet Union as the common foe, and it bonded NATO together very strongly. At the end of the Soviet Union, NATO got fat and flabby and lazy and cheap. And as soon as you get soft, somebody's going to start pushing. And Putin saw that when he went into Crimea and got away with it, went into Georgia and got away with it. And then he went into Ukraine and expected to have exactly the same result. And initially, it was the courage of the Ukrainian people that prevented him having it all his own way. But that stand by the little man actually inspired Europe. It inspired NATO. It inspired the free world to stand up and say, yes, enough is enough. And we're going to support this courageous nation and, you know, and stand behind them. And I'm going to spend most of my time over the coming year writing to encourage and remind people to do exactly that.
Who dares shares? Who dares to look at the world for what it is, to examine the history of how it got there, and who challenges each and one of us to play their role in the world's future. Robin, this has just been a great conversation. I urge everyone out there to look up Robin's website. We'll put a link in the blog, and also get his book, Slava Ukraini. And Robin, thanks again for a great conversation.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for giving me a good listening to.